right back around.
Are you?
Yep.
You flipping the script this morning?
Get ready. Get ready. I don't know what the script is yet.
Yeah, that's okay.
Once I do,
I'm
flipping.
How are you, Justin?
I'm good. How are
Good.
you?
I'm excited.
I see that.
Yeah.
Why?
I'm excited about our next podcast.
Yes.
Yes.
Wait, our next podcast, or
This one will release.
Oh boy, Matt.
Wait.
Hang on.
I think we release Tuesday,
You're
but we'll
excited
record.
about the 28th. I think that's what we're getting
Oh,
to. But
okay.
We don't do math, folks.
That's okay.
Or calendars.
Either way, I'm excited about
I'm
the
excited
28th.
as well.
I'm
Yes.
excited about the 28th. So yes.
February 28th.
Yes.
I posted the little synopsis of our episode yesterday, and I put a little blurb about, our event, and I forgot to put the 28th in there. So Jackson texted. Thank you, Jackson, if you're listening. He texted me and let me know. So I
got
fixed
you.
it. But so just sometime in February.
There
at
you go.
7 p.m.
Is it 7 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay.
7 p.m.
Cool.
Don't forget.
No, I'm not forgetting.
Not you, everyone else.
Oh, I was going to
think
say.
you'll be there.
Yeah, I'll be there.
You'll probably be there early. Don't mess with people's minds, man. 7 p.m.
7 p.m. on the 28th.
on the 28th.
7 on the 28th.
Yeah.
Yes.
I am excited, though. Hopefully, you guys will see us, or we'll see you there February 28th, 7 p.m. Bring some questions.
Yeah, bring some friends.
Bring some friends. That's right. I like it.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations.
so yes, not about this podcast isn't about there, but I'm still excited.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it in the context, like you said, and I think it was Kierkegaard that talked about, the dark night of the soul type thing. Can you think of a time when you've just, and I appreciate what you share, from your transparency regarding depression and so forth in that context. And I think in some ways the two are similar and maybe very much the same, but it doesn't necessarily always seem. I guess when I put it out there, dark night of the soul, what comes to your mind? And maybe it's an antiquated type.
No, I think, yeah, it does come to mind in terms of maybe depression, but also kind of discouragement or doubt, or a lot of those D words, right?
Sure.
Depression, discouragement, doubt, despair.
Sure.
Any other D words? That kind of thing, though.
Yeah. And I was, it's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a person who struggles with depression, as a whole. But it was interesting. I think from my perspective, I've probably experienced what I would consider a dark night. And I think for me, that process is those moments when it just seems like God may be far away.
Yeah.
From a spiritual standpoint, and looking back, it's been funny as I've been looking back and kind of reviewing through the Bible, starting in Genesis this year. It's like, I think there's this part of us, and I think it's a myth on my part that, I think the tendency is to think that people in the Old Testament were almost clueless.
Yeah.
You follow? And
yes.
I'm recognizing that's a myth on my part, because I believe, as I'm really looking back, I'm recognizing how God has shown up in so many ways for so many individuals in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Do
you, as you read those things, as you get older, I mean, do you, every time you read it, does it feel more and more relatable?
Yeah, very much so.
Kind of those guys are stupid factor goes more and more like, yeah, just like me.
Exactly. And I think that connects with it. I think and here again, I'm not blaming it on culture, but it is almost that similar mindset to a certain degree that, those people back then,
Yeah.
They didn't have it figured out. And
Like us.
like we tend to think, yes. Yeah. But in reality, they're just like us, and we're just like them. And I think, there is this context where we can say, they just didn't have what they needed without, the presence of the Holy Spirit and Jesus. Jesus had came. Now we have the Holy Spirit in that context. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, it's like, well, as I look back, it's like God the Father, God the Son, in some cases, God the Holy Spirit showed up.
Yeah.
And yet, as I'm thinking about it too, he showed up in some miraculous ways.
Yeah.
To make his presence known.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, we do have the biblical reference that offers, like 400 years where no one heard from God.
Yeah.
In that context. And that's, I'm not saying, go ahead.
We translate it that way.
Right.
That's not necessarily the truth. It's just that the recording of what was happening stopped, right?
And that's where I was going to. It's,
gotcha.
It's not so much that, God was silent, I don't think. I think it's more the aspect of, what was recorded in those events.
Yeah.
If you will.
What he wanted recorded was enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my personal life, it's interesting because if I look at that context of the Old Testament, I can recognize in my life how God's been very present at certain, points in my life, certain stages, if you will.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can admit, it does seem as if, and this isn't a negative thing in the context of Dark Night, but it did seem like I've just gone through this process of probably one of the darker times that I can remember in my life just recently. So when I think about that, that darkness, it was as if, more of a going through the motions process.
Yeah.
But yet, the interesting part too, is I think about it, it had, as we know, probably on the other side of a difficulty, it had very little to do with God being quiet as much as it had to do with me being in a different stage, an unfamiliar territory, an uncomfortable place. And what did I do with that? And I think that's probably more so for me what led to that, that dark night, if you will, that dark night period. And here again, I'm not being dramatic. I don't want to sound like I'm being dramatic in that process, but I'm going to recognize it as a, probably a months long type dynamic, to where it just seemed like God was quiet. And the reason I bring that out there is it's like, I think most of us will experience something like that,
Yeah.
And here again, I'm not saying God isn't, or, Jesus isn't available in those contexts, but yet I think, those dark nights have a reason, they have a purpose. And in some ways, once we get to the other side of it, that time, whatever that time frame is, I think we can recognize the bright days and how our view has shifted at that point. And it's like, and I think that's where I'm coming from, this aspect of encouragement, that says, yeah, if you're in that circumstance, and I realize, we've talked about it before, how the shortness of days and, short light of the days and longer nights, can tend to affect people, and yet for me personally, I would say that wasn't even really a part of it, for me. And like I say, for me, a lot of it, I think, was life cycle stages. Well, in context, and here again, this is just kind of the stuff that I've thought about in context. I think part of it was my mom's passing.
Yeah.
From August. I think some of that reality set in a little more, around Christmas, not having her there for the first time.
Yeah.
And that I want to, put that out there too in the context of, that's absolutely positive. That's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet I want to put that out there in such a way that says, yeah, if you've lost someone, when you lose someone, I would say, to recognize that's going to be a part of that process. And I think it hit me a little harder personally as I came into some other life cycle stages, because I can respect the fact that in the back of my mind, I knew, probably especially since retirement, I knew that my mom was praying for, us, our family, myself, on a daily basis. And somewhere along the line, that reality came back that those prayers aren't being offered up anymore, and in my humanness, it's like, crap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it felt like. I don't mean to be crass, but you know what I mean? It was like, those prayers aren't being offered on my behalf anymore. And, to be able to recognize, okay, God isn't limited by that, Go ahead.
Just to pause you real quick. So much of what you're describing, and a lot of the things that contribute to those dark days, there's beauty in it, especially as you can look back on those things. I mean, it's really hard to say that and think that in the middle of it.
Yes.
Coming from my own personal experience. But this whole thing about, well, crap, those prayers aren't being offered. It's coming from a place of beauty of that you had that experience with your mother. You
sure
basically leaned on knowing that, right?
Exactly.
And then once you leaned on it this last time and realized, whoa, there's nothing to lean on. You know?
Exactly.
Like, that stark reality is,
And that's not to say that I don't have other people. We don't have other people praying for us, that, because I know there are people, and I appreciate all those, and I know you appreciate all those, but when that was kind of that reality that set in along the way.
Yeah.
And, and I think in some cases I don't have an issue sharing. Maybe it's even helpful, even, the other stages that go along with that. I think, definitely as we were trying to transition, the house, get the other house, and certain weightedness, from trying to get the other house fixed up and running into issues and no insurance, coverage on, the issues that came up. That was a part of it. And I would say, even as far as a life cycle stage, recognizing, our kids in relationship, you know what I'm saying? And this is nothing against them having relationship or who they're in relationship with. I think for me, it just came down to more of an expectation of what that would look like.
Yeah.
And to recognize that in that process, in that adjustment, and I realized my parents went through it with me, this process, and your parents went through it with you. This process of developing relationship, and and you're building relationship with Megan, and depending less on your parents, that it's a normal life cycle stage.
It's a redefining.
Yes.
It's a DTR.
Yes. 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 But yet what makes it difficult is it's a redefining, but the difference between the D part is a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Because in that process, and I think it was more so with Lizzie, I'm just going nothing against, but I think it was more so when in that process of transition, I can understand. In the past, I had never really had to, not not necessarily way. In other words, I could pretty much speak my mind. I could be unfiltered, in that I could pretty much speak my mind, and I could recognize that, Lizzie would hear that, and the context was good because it wasn't really personal. But yeah, I can also realize as that relationship, her relationship was redefining from us. I did need to be a little more mindful. And, in hindsight, she was able to recognize some of the defensiveness, and so we were able to redefine that relationship. And now it's good. It's something that we have been able to go through, but I can recognize how that initial process and my expectations not being met. Not that there was anything wrong with the relationship there again, but being able to recognize it was my expectations were different. And I think in some ways that led me to some aspects of control, which is it's like, do you see this? Do you see that? Which made it seem like I was being critical, where I don't think it wouldn't have come across that way if it was just someone out there that we were both observing. Did you notice that? Because it would have just been, no, I didn't observe that. And no, but that makes sense,
Right.
that kind of thing. So it's just been interesting as I've kind of gone through this process, if you will. And I think, there's other, I'll call them strivings on my part, around the holidays, with people. I think it gets a little different, from a workload dynamic and just stressors from work, that I was probably taking on myself, in that context. But being able to recognize that, and I think part of, I appreciate what you're saying. I know I appreciate what you're saying. And so often in the middle of it, we don't know what we know until the end.
Yeah.
And when we get to the end, we realize how part of us is back.
Yeah.
Yes. It's that ability to say, okay, whereas before for me, I'll be honest, in that process, for me, it's like, I could find myself oversleeping, that kind of thing. And, and the holidays, I realized the schedules change and so forth. But, after being back, it's like now I'm just ready to, my initial 4:00, 4:15. It's like, I'm on. The bright days are here, and I'm able to be back into who I consider myself to be.
You know what it kind of makes me think of?
No, but I'd love you to tell.
Because this is just hearing you talk about kind of your dark days situation, and reflecting on my own, it reminds me of when a child is playing on the floor, perfectly happy, and he looks up and his mother's not there. He goes, "Where's mom?"
Sure.
And, oh, she had to run, whatever. And then that lighthearted, like just not a care in the world. All of a sudden, there's care now.
Sure.
And there's like, they
Concern.
can't be peace. They can't go back to the way it was, right?
Sure.
Because there's this concern, this like, and I feel like a lot of times it's very much feels like that with God in these situations, the darkness, the despair, the discouragement,
sure,
the depression. It's like, well, where's Dad? Because I could just feel his presence, and I would just go about and do my thing, and everything was light and good, and I could just do my thing, knowing he was right behind me.
Sure.
And then I turned around, I was like, then I started experiencing things that felt like he wasn't there, and I turned around, I don't see him. Where'd he go?
Yeah.
And then you start looking, and it feels more and more like he went to the store. And now you're like, well,
and he didn't take you with him,
right? So now you're like, okay, all right, okay, I guess I got to figure this one out. Then you kind of start to take on personally,
right? No, I hear you.
Those cares of the world and those things that you need to do, and depending a little bit less on Dad,
No, I hear you.
And, I think, we can go on and on about the reasons. I definitely think God does these things for a reason. I believe that the valleys are integral to our faith,
Sure.
But
I see them as part of the progression as well.
Yeah.
Of faith, the progression of faith, the growing in our faith. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess what I would want to say clearly is that I don't believe the better faith you have, the more faith you have, the less values you'll have. Like, it's not a guarantee of, that you should be able to have enough faith to get rid of valleys, right? Like, that's, I wouldn't want to convey that. And I don't think that's what you meant, but I would just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
I think as much faith as you can have, you're still going to go through those valleys, but the faith is what can help you walk through those valleys.
Sure.
Of course.
Do you remember what you shared like last week or the week before at CR about faith and valleys and the absence? Do you remember what you shared as far as it's? Do you remember? I a little glimmers coming to your mind.
Valley, but I definitely
it wasn't valley.
Yeah,
but it was faith isn't the absence of difficulty.
Right. Faith isn't because I don't have any doubt and I just believism, and it's just it's easy to believe and it's all there. Faith is in contrast to the doubt you have.
Sure.
Like, the greater faith you have, the more you're believing in spite of those doubts, in spite of those discouragements, those despairs,
Sure.
I believe that's when faith is at its strongest.
Agreed.
Which is the opposite of what we kind of believe, right? Our faith is at its strongest when I believe the best and I don't have doubts, and I just don't believe that's true. I believe our faith is at it's working at its best when all of those things are in our face and we're having to look at them and say, yes, but God.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. No doubt. And I think, and I really appreciate the analogy of the son and the father. Well, daughters are, of course, included with the relationship to the father. But, for me personally, I was thinking, it in a lot of cases, what I was experiencing for me, and I think that part of what led to that dynamic was my desire to, when I didn't necessarily feel God or, see God in some tangible way, it was, I ran ahead looking for him, in my striving, well, it's got to be this way. And this is what has to be done. And therefore it's up to me to do it now all by myself, in that and I think that's what actually part of what, and I think, here again, it's all in combination, it's like, well, I need to get that figured out. I need to get that figured out, and I need to get that figured out.
Yeah.
And these were all bigger things, based on circumstances and, life cycle stages, that it's like, this is all new to me, So I'm respecting the fact of, in hindsight, there again, the self-reflection, if you will, how all these things kind of came together in that. And that's where, from that perspective, I want to offer that hope. I want to offer that encouragement that, yes, there will be the time when we get to the other side. And, it's not just a dark night indefinitely.
Yeah.
Though
in the middle of it,
yes,
you'll often be convinced this is my new reality.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. And you've mentioned that before, in that, not that it seems infinitely long, but I think it was along that term. There isn't the ability, or it's difficult, let's put it that way, to see that there is an end in sight, especially if it's gone on for, a month or, and that's not to say, that circumstances can't go on for years.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm thankful to be able to recognize, okay, yeah, it's been an interesting months, I'll call it, not necessarily, it wasn't anything. I don't think it was anything that necessarily settled in, right in August or, right at that time. I think it was a reality change or redefining, as you put it, that kind of set in with other things that brought about that. And it's not that there weren't, moments of joy, in that, celebrations, Christmas and family and, and John and Lizzie both had a birthday here, within the past month, to where it's all been good. But yeah, there was that energy, excitement that wasn't able to be.
It's tempered.
It was tempered. Yeah. Limited, governed to a certain degree. Yeah. And for me, I think I noticed that more so in how I view the morning time.
Yeah.
For personally for me, it's just, yeah. So this is your turn to flip the script now. I see the wheels turning.
Well,
but
yeah, what's funny is I had a lot of thoughts. And then they would come, and then they would just disappear.
Oh, well, that's okay too.
I think that's okay. One of the thoughts was how often we don't even know I'll use the word structures. We don't necessarily know the structures in our life that prop us up.
Sure.
Right? And when those slip or we lose them or things change or that structure shifts, all of a sudden our life is kind of in scramble. It's kind of like the mom leaving the room kind of thing where like,
sure.
why don't things feel right? And as you walk through the situation, kind of like what you described, you kind of get through and you can look back and go, well, my mom died, and then helping them transition and kind of those realizations as they came in place, and then life cycles. Like as you're able to look back and go, oh, that structure shifted, that one was removed, and the things that I was leaning on, like they're not there, so I have to like reposition in my seat and figure out, how to stand strong, like how to stand tall, and not be leaning on those things now.
Sure.
Because even if for some reason I was able to get them back. Let's say you had a rift in a relationship and you knew that it was repairable, but like for right now, it's just tough, right? Like even if you perceive the opportunity for that structure coming back, you recognize something, right? Like that there was something about that I was leaning on that causes me to kind of start to fall, to slip when I don't have it. And I think that's natural, and I think that's okay, and I think God gives us those things to help us lean. Like, I think that's his goodness, but I also think sometimes he reminds us of our frailty and of our weakness and of our need for him and says, yeah, not that thing. You don't get to lean on that anymore.
Sure.
Now what are you going to lean on?
Exactly.
Right?
Or who are you going to lean on?
And we start scrambling, like, what can I do? And like you said, maybe striving to solve it, or, and what you were saying about, I would almost describe what you were saying, like kind of the scramble, right? Like in our scramble, depending on your number, if you go back to the primal questions, right? Like,
sure, okay.
Your scramble might like look different in those dark times. And for markets, work harder.
I hear you.
Right? It's like, or strive, right? For others, it might be don't get out of bed.
That could be tied to the 7 purpose.
Yeah.
Because I think, when we think about that dark night, my purpose, can tend to... be affected,
and I feel fainter.
Yeah. Maybe. And I'm not saying that's the same for everyone based on that question.
Well,
but
if you're a success person and you're in a dark time, then it feels like you're being less successful. If you're a safe person,
could be a failure. You could see yourself as a failure in that process.
Or if you're a safe person and all of a sudden it just doesn't feel safe. Again, like I think your numbers can kind of dictate how you slip into that dark time, and then what the scramble looks like in that dark time. Kind of the modus operandi, right, that you slip into as a result of. But the bottom line is, like, God desires intimacy with us, and sometimes he will walk out of the room so that we recognize, like, what's not right here. Sometimes he'll pull things out of the room that we're leaning on too much to say, yeah, not that, and let us reset. And we're going to reset, hopefully with a little bit more faith and a little bit more dependency on him, but we also might find another thing to lean on instead.
Sure.
Right? And he's a good father. He lets that happen. But I do believe that's a big part of it, is just when those things in our life shift and we're left going, whoa, what's this thing? life. It doesn't make sense anymore without that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Death of loved ones is a really good example. Loss of jobs, just kind of those life things. Or it could just be something as simple and small as your best friend moves to a different state for a job thing. And, it's sad and all that. And you didn't think it would be that big a deal, but all of a sudden it's like life just feels different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was saying, as it's kind of funny. I don't want to make light of those dynamics, but, just I was working with a young family as they were, working with their child about not nursing anymore. And I think about it in the terms of that pacifier. When a pacifier goes away, it's like, hey, what's going on here? That kind of thing. That's as you were describing that, I think we can have multiple pacifiers to a certain degree that we lean on for self-soothing. And I think, when that changes, when those structures, if you will, constructs, change or shift. Yeah. It can be different.
Now what do I self-soothe with? Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good
yes. How do I? How do I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I might not have ever even realized how that thing, met a need and helped me self-soothe. And now that isn't here, and I was thinking about it in Saint, like you shared with, the prayers of my mom, and being able to come back to that dynamic that says, okay, the Holy Spirit is interceding for us continually before the Father, it's like, because I think, so much of what we think about or how we think about does come down to the constructs we have, and I think we have to at times challenge that challenge our human perspective based on, a biblical perspective.
Yeah.
And just kind of being able to visit that.
The Old Testament, like you said, provides a pretty good demonstration of just the frailty of humanity. And again, when you read it, when you're young and whatever, it's like, these idiots. You had God right there in a cloud and fire, like pouring water out of rocks for you, dropping food from the sky. You guys are so stupid. It's like the older I get, I'm like, holy crap, I am the same.
We doubt God's faithfulness.
Yeah. He just dropped food from the sky in so many ways, right? Like I can see his provision in my life so many ways. And yet it's like, okay, God, what about today? Like, I'm hungry.
Yeah. We're tired of cornflakes, God. We want something a little different.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good metaphor for my struggle with mundanity and just like, okay, there's been enough Tuesdays.
I hear you.
I need more Fridays. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of the same idea for me. But so a lot of good thoughts.
Well, no, like you say, and I think part of what I have been doing, in the self-reflection in some ways too, is if you want to call what I describe as depression, I'm okay with that. But yet, in some ways, it wasn't necessarily what I would call depressive based on what I've heard from other people. You know what I'm saying? And so it's not like you can't say, Mark, that was depression. And I wouldn't say, well, okay, I can see that. But it's, I've really honestly wrestled with that. Whether it would be considered that, when you take into context, because it was definitely a sleep dynamic. I just desired to sleep a little more, which I can understand can be a sign of depression, that kind of thing. But it wasn't like I wanted to spend the entire day in bed. It was just, I was missing that spark for me, for that early morning. And I think, it was also reflected from a spiritual dynamic that my quiet time didn't necessarily have all of the
juice.
Sure.
The pizzazz.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. The spirit-filled dynamic, of saying, oh, wow, that's cool, or thank you, God, that kind of, it just wasn't there. It was, for me, it was more of a going through the motion, which I think was still very helpful.
Yeah.
In that process.
Yeah.
But, looking back, I can recognize, it's like the energy wasn't there. The desire wasn't there, and, that's, so by all means, you can push back, but I still respect the aspect that from my perspective, it wasn't like what I hear from other people.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the closest I'll come.
It's funny you asking about it being a therapist.
Well, yeah, I mean,
but I get it. I get it. It's just, it's like, I'm not going to tell you it's depression. You're the thing. But no, the thing that kept coming to mind is, your word, the continuum, right? And I do believe depression is a continuum.
I hear you.
And I think, I've used the river analogy a lot.
Sure.
Right? Yep. It's this idea that depression at its worst kills you.
I got
right?
you.
At its worst. It convinces you or, you're in such a state of mind that it kills you.
I hear you.
Right? So that's one end of the continuum. That's the worst end.
Yep.
And I think
that's the completely hopeless end. Yes.
The only hope is exit.
Sure.
Right?
I hear you.
That's the extreme.
To get out. If I'm continually in this
river, you're just tumbling, you're drowning, and it's just yeah. It's you need relief
to the point where it seems as if there is no end.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And I mean, it depends on how you. That reality. What's reality? Is it perception or is it what's in front of you? And I think that's one thing that I struggle with in the worst parts of depression is like whether reality is true or not. What I feel is more real than that. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So it's like you were saying. It seems like there's no hope. No, there isn't.
Right.
Because that's all. You know what I mean? It's limited to what I'm able to perceive.
Sure.
But you're still right. Like there's I have hope. Right. I have proof. I have the manna He's provided, food from heaven, the quails, the water that He's burst from rocks.
Yeah.
So in those moments, those are the ropes I'm clinging to while I'm tumbling in the water, kind of thing. And then I just wait for Him to yank me out, and He does. But anyway, back to the analogy. Like I've described it before. Like there's sometimes I can't see the river. I can't hear the river. I can't hear the rushing over the rocks. It's it's not a thing. And in those moments, I'm like, was that even real? I can't even remember what a river looks like, what it sounds like, So I'm like, maybe I'm just crazy,
No, I hear you.
Maybe whatever. Yep. And then it's like, struggling with seasonal,
sad.
Yeah, sad. Seasonal affected disorder.
Yep.
Yeah. Like it will come around fall, and it's pretty standard that, oh yeah, that's what the river sounds like. Like I can hear it, and sometimes I can get a glimpse of it and I can say, oh yeah, that's what it looks like. Sometimes I use that analogy of like sometimes my toes are wet, right? Like it's like, well, it's definitely here. it's not a thing. Like I'm definitely a little wet.
My shoes are a little squishy.
Yeah, and that's when I start going, hey, friends, maybe pray a little bit because I'm feeling that water over my toes, that kind of thing. And again, I do think it's a continuum, and I think every person struggles with some level of that continuum at some point in their life, whether you want to call it depression or not. I hear the river, I see the river. It's causing a new way of thinking. Yeah. Right? When you don't hear the river, you don't see the river, your thoughts are complete. It's that lightness that you described.
Yeah.
Where you get that spring in the step or whatever. And I think, but again, I'm not a therapist, but that's kind of my perspective is that a lot of people will say that they struggle with depression. And you can never doubt that. I don't. Yeah. That's where I'm anyone's experience, right? But I can definitely say there's a gamut of experiences you can experience, and like you said, the sleep thing, the lack of passion, like all of that speaks to those. I mean, those are a lot of the symptoms. So,
yeah, and it's interesting, and as you're talking about the perception and reality, there's I don't know, maybe you've heard of it, Gestalt. It's basically the aspect where, you know, the sum of these individual things collectively create a greater meaning. You know, and it's the stuff that's right here, you know, as I put my hand over my face, it's the fact that you're still in the room, but all I can see primarily is what's right in front of me. And I think that's where your squishy feet, your wet socks are concerned, because you get to that point where all I really know is I got wet socks. And the last time I had wet socks, it led to this, it led to that, you know.
And whether it led to that or not, wet socks suck, right? So it's like, I mean, from a sensory, just gestalt perspective, like it's, to go back to your particular situation, it's really hard to be passionate about doing the thing you're doing when your socks are wet.
Exactly.
Right? Like, 'cause you're like, this is miserable, but I guess I need to keep hammering, you know?
Exactly.
Like, I guess I need to keep, you know, doing therapy
Doing
with
thing.
people. Like, doing the thing that Mark does, but it's like, it's real uncomfortable. This is not like I remember it being before, you know, because all I can think about is these squishy socks, you know? And I think that's,
yeah. And I appreciate what you're sharing, you know, and I'll be on full transparency. What I should say is I'm hearing where you're coming from in that, you know, I have these factors in place, and, you know, that being said, it's interesting how we can lose sight of hope. And I think it's difficult at times to be authentic, to be transparent about the wet socks. And I think, you know, that's unfortunate. And you know, part of our, you know, we had an F3 individual who, you know, ended his life, you know, that kind of thing. And that's, I suppose I hadn't really thought about it, you know, that was definitely during that time. You know, and I, you know, had different people reaching out to me to a certain degree to kind of, you know, process that. And, you know, so that had some weight. But I think for me, the sad part of that was that individual couldn't see or didn't want to see or admit or, you know, didn't want to recognize the fullness of the supports they had. You know, and I'm respecting the fact that that's difficult. Don't get me wrong. You know,
so I'm going to challenge the words want.
Right. Go ahead.
You know?
Yeah.
Because it's the hand in your face thing. As much as I want to see you, I can't because my hand's in front of my face.
Right.
So I want to see those supports.
I spread my fingers apart a little more.
But maybe I didn't know I could spread my hands a little bit.
And
maybe, you know,
And I think that's where I'm coming from, because I was hearing, you know, at the funeral and while processing this with people, you know, all of the supports that they did have. You know what I mean? And that's the anger that I experienced, because it's like, you know, to on one end of the spectrum, let's do it that way. You know, I actually had people saying to me that selfie's SOB. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, it's like, you know, leaving all of, you know, you know, so I'm not, it's not that I'm not sensitive to the want, don't get me wrong, but I think it is like you're saying, that ability, and I have to be able to, in this moment, I'm also aware of the fact that most of the people around me wouldn't know that I experienced a dark night at all. Because I wasn't necessarily, you know, so I'm here again, I don't want to come across as judgmental. You know, in that, and it may, and I apologize if it did.
The pain on this side of it will cause that.
Sure,
if that makes
isolating.
Sense. Yeah, like it's frustrating to be on this side and say, "I was right here," you know. And I think, I've had, you know, lots of talks with Megan about this, right?
Sure,
because this is what this is.
You
know, is like she's always right there. And I know she knows that. I know that. And yet sometimes it just doesn't feel that way. You know?
Sure.
And I think what you're saying about recognizing the supports around you is a discipline.
I agree.
that you have to learn and you have to practice.
Yep.
It
Agreed.
doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come free.
Agreed.
And when you practice disciplines, sometimes they don't have, like, they're just doing it because you know you should.
Sure.
They don't have the impact that you would want from them, like getting up and working out. There's some days you don't
Sure.
feel like it. There's some days it feels like you didn't gain anything. You almost feel like you went backwards.
Yeah.
You did less than you did yesterday.
Now my underwear are wet.
Right.
You know, not only do I have wet feet, but now I just got wet underwear
Yes.
by working out in the
Yeah.
dewy grass.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
hearing where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because in our culture, there isn't this instantaneous,
Right.
and that's even part of what I want to offer, you know, in this
Yeah.
process. You know, this wasn't just a, you know, we're talking about a months long dynamic
Yeah.
here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to reverse that, and I'm hearing exactly what you're saying, you know, where I'm trying to do this one thing, I'm trying to reach out.
Right.
And it just seems like
Right.
it's just as uncomfortable, if not more so,
Right.
than it was before. So why
to use
bother?
your wet underwear
Underwear.
analogy, yes, it's
Yes.
like I had wet feet, then I did the discipline of reaching out. I
Yep.
knew I should. And the person said, well, I'm busy. And frankly, just read the Bible.
Sure.
Right? Or whatever. Just
Stop it.
yes, stop it. Right.
Yeah.
And so then,
Don't
yeah,
think
my
that
hands
anymore.
slapped, right? So, yeah, like you said, now my underwear's wet. Now I'm having to deal with that every day. And it's like,
Yeah.
do I try reaching it? Well, why would I do that? You know,
Yeah.
why would I try that again? And again, oh, yeah, it is a discipline. And I think what I've learned for myself is that it's a discipline that I still have to do.
Sure.
The reaching out is specifically a discipline for me. And sometimes it doesn't feel better as a result of doing it. But I know over all the times that I've struggled a little bit,
Sure.
depending on how close I was to the river, every time, it wasn't a guarantee that every time I reached out was better. But if you look at the average of them all, drastically better
Sure.
because of that, you know? And then also like gaining a healthy support system, right?
Yeah.
So that's the other half of the battle is like if you reach out to the wrong people, you're going to get your hand slapped and that's going to make things worse. So you really do need to build a very tight community of
Sure.
people who know how to help you. And part of people knowing how to help you is you communicating.
Exactly.
When you're healthy,
Yep.
you know, not too far from,
Yeah, you can't wait.
not too healthy.
Yeah.
Because then you can't remember what the river looks like,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. And here again, if I may, I'm kind of maybe this is how I see it. You know,
Yeah.
we talk from two ends of the same spectrum, you know, in some ways. And I think, you know, as I mentioned the other individual and I was thinking, you know, more about you, I've been able to recognize how you have, you know, started to be able to reach out more and, you know, it's an honor to be in that group, if I may, that you reach out to when you're starting to get wet feet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And in that process, and you know, that's when I hear that, I know it's important. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's imperative at that point.
Yeah.
Because I know what that takes for you to be able to ask for support in that process. And yeah, it's an honor to be able to support you, you know, and Megan in that process when those times come, because I can just recognize the value in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate you, you know, reaching out in those moments to do so, because I know it's like the wet underwear. Yeah, now your cheeks are wet too, but that's all right too. You know, those are positive things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just that's how important it is. I mean, I think for anyone, you know, to be able to reach out, to look beyond what I'm feeling, what I'm seeing, and have those supports in place that can basically say, okay, help me. You know, because that's, you know, and that may mean, you know, just shutting your mouth and listening.
Yep.
You know, that may be the help that's required at that moment.
The thing, people, if you have someone like that in your life, what you need to understand is there's no fixing or yanking them out of the river.
Yeah.
If you want to help them, your best bet is to get down and hold their hand in the wet.
Sure. Yep. You might get wet too.
You might get a little wet.
Yep.
You're probably going to be fine.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
But that's, if you really want them
Yep.
to come, be
I hear
comforting to them and a resource to them.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. It doesn't look like, well, let me yank you up here on the shore. It's nice and dry up here.
Exactly.
Just get out
Why
of
wouldn't
there.
you want to be up here?
There's rocks, right? Just step right there,
Yeah.
And it's...
And quite often I'll be on, in the process of working with individuals, I'll use the mud puddle, not necessarily the river.
Yeah.
But, sometimes in the midst of the wet feet, we find ourselves just sitting in a mud puddle.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that's what it takes is someone coming alongside and being willing to sit in the puddle with us, and not being concerned. I mean, like you're saying, you're going to get wet either way. For crying out loud, we typically shower at least once a day.
Yeah.
It's like we get wet all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
But yet there's something about that wetness that doesn't seem right, does it?
Right.
We're not comfortable with it.
Right.
And yet it doesn't mean that there isn't.
Yeah. And when I'm down in the puddle or the river, I'm like, yeah, I don't blame you. Stay up there.
Exactly.
But just get out of my space.
If you're not going to come
it's
here
hard
with
enough
me.
to not drown. Stop telling me how not to drown. Now I'm focused on what you're telling me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
so,
So back to what you were sharing, though. I definitely believe that there are principles that apply throughout the gamut of that continuum, right?
Sure.
And
Agreed.
Reaching out, having a solid support system is just so crucial, and then using it is so crucial.
Agreed.
Because we do need to be able to lean. So as you were talking, it made me just think about it, with our friend from F3 and just kind of that whole thing, and how you look from the outside in and go, he had what he needed.
I hear you.
It just re-emphasizes for me the importance of that second lesson in CR, which is powerless. And we want to believe we're not. And
I hear you.
I think the most important thing, especially if you struggle with any kind of mental health thing, is to lean into that fact.
Sure.
I'm powerless. So what can I do about that? Well, I have to, depend on my higher power. That's the most important thing. Secondarily, he gives me support systems, or he calls us to that. And so for me, that's what I've recognized is like during those times I don't have what it takes, and therefore I need others to, hold my arms up, pray for me, listen to me, be there for, that kind of thing. And I have to do my part, which is the discipline, which is getting the stupid words out of my mouth, and that combination is a recognition of my powerlessness to say, well, I have to do this because I'm powerless against it,
Sure.
And I think sometimes that can be the struggle, is thinking I should have what it takes.
Sure. Or I can figure this out.
Right. Where it's in me somewhere, or it needs to be. Everyone's telling me it should be there, so I just got to keep looking, and you're not going to find it. It's not in you.
Right.
And
if you're at that point where it seems as if you have no supports, now is the time to start building the supports.
Yes. Yeah.
Because yes, I respect the fact, and I think that was part of the equation. Where my mom and the prayers were, because it just seemed like that support had shifted from my construct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I to be able to recognize that, okay, maybe it's what I perceived, but it may not necessarily be 100% accurate.
Yeah.
In the full context of things. And I think, being able to have, other supports, other people, God first, of course, but then his word and, and other people, to be able to say, okay, is that accurate? Is that, and I think, because I do recognize how so often in the process of what I do, it's like, it's unfortunate that I'm the person that most people have, that not most people. I'm an option, it's unfortunate that I'm an option where certain people are concerned because they feel as if they have no one else who can listen and they don't know who else to talk to. Mm-hmm. You follow me? That's
you mean it's an unfortunate that you're the only option, the
yes,
the last and only option.
Yes, that it seems like they've.
Yeah.
I don't get me wrong. I'm happy to be a support.
Yeah.
But I feel for people that are in that situation where it seems and it seems as if I am the only support. I feel for those people.
Yeah.
And so that being said, I want to put that out there to where if you feel as if you don't have a support, by all means, talk with someone. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's a counselor or, but find someone as you're describing, it's that isolation that's, that I'll call it a lie, if you will, that says I can't talk with anyone about this.
Yeah.
Or another lie at times is no one would understand.
Right.
Right. No one's experienced what I have. And granted, no
part
one
of that
has.
Lie is believing that fact even matters.
Sure.
I shouldn't talk about it because no one can understand how I feel means I shouldn't talk about it.
Sure.
No, that's not true.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because there are people who do understand, but even the people who don't, if that makes sense, it doesn't mean I shouldn't talk about it.
Exactly.
But you should be careful who and when and all that.
Yeah.
Is depending. But yeah, that's good. I think there's gonna be people listening to this who know exactly what we're talking about. And are like, I need to do something. And then there's going to be the other half. They go, interesting,
Sure.
I'm trying to think of how to put this. I feel like
You're thinking?
I'm thinking. It does feel when you have struggled with tumbling in the water that no one else can understand except those who have tumbled in the water. Mm-hmm. And I believe there is some truth to that, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That being said, the other part of this is that you believe that's your reality.
Sure.
And it's not. Mm-hmm. The reality is you, just as much you on the shore, healthy, not being able to hear the river. They both exist. And that version of you is around the corner,
Sure.
And when you get out there, you're the same as the people who don't understand.
No,
you also don't understand.
Yeah.
I look back a week after kind of that jump out of depression. I go, who the heck was that? Like, it's happened so many times. It's like, and then I don't mind talking about it because I feel like I'm talking about a different person. It's like that Justin really struggled, man. It was rough. Mm-hmm. And I don't mind talking about that version of me, the past version.
Sure.
The middle of it, I'm just like, that's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want,
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So anyway, if you're in either category, if you're in the category don't understand or whatever, it's a little bit foreign, just put it in your pocket because no one's above structures being removed.
Yeah.
Right?
Put it in your pocket and be thankful for the opportunities, the supports you currently have.
Yes.
Because I think in some ways that makes a difference, and,
right.
Be thankful for those who have taught you in some ways maybe to have some of those disciplines.
Yeah.
I think that's a beneficial thing. There's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of unimportant things we teach our kids, and there's a lot of important things that we, don't necessarily recognize need to be taught. That emotional intelligence type stuff, it's not always that someone's there, but I think, people on the other end of the spectrum, might be able to say, I don't understand, but.
And speaking of teaching things and not knowing, like there's a lot of people who are taught how to deal with these mental hangups because their dad would go fishing with them. And they know, like, a good day on the water solves, right? Like, those quotes.
Sure.
And a motorcycle has another one, like, they call it wind therapy.
Oh, okay.
But, like, I think some people will never understand the depths of depression because they were given for free some tools that work.
Sure.
And they don't know how well they work.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Getting out on the water, whatever it is, whatever it is. I'm just saying.
Yep.
Because I like what you've said many times, which is people who go through things like you do naturally do the things that you do. I don't know.
Sure.
Well, how do you say that?
There's nothing wrong with you?
Yeah.
Because everything you do makes perfect sense
Yes.
based on what you've experienced and where you've come from.
Yes, thank you. That was I need to write that down. I've butchered that so many times in the last.
I just had to check to make sure that was the one you were referring to.
You nailed it. Good job, Mark. You said your thing right. But yeah, so I like to think that like my struggle with depression is exactly how it would be based on what, the things in my life, that kind of thing. And if you don't, I also like to think, well, of course not, because you were given the right tools and, therefore that bottom has been capped, right?
Sure.
To the depths that you can fall.
Or so it would seem.
So it would seem, yes. Which is a very good point because, again, if you remove enough structures,
sure.
You look at Job.
Life cycle stages.
Yeah.
Because anytime we're redefining that aspect of acceptance, identity, security, or purpose, there's going to be...
you think about midlife crisis.
Sure.
Yeah. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Postpartum depression.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
So those kind of things. Yeah. No, I would dare say no one is immune.
Right.
Let's put it that way. Yes, I believe some people have been gifted, taught disciplines, that are beneficial, but yeah.
Yep.
So yes, appreciate you sharing from your end of
and
the
you
continuum.
Too, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing yours.
No problem.
I know one person for sure will appreciate you sharing more this time.
Okay.
That'd be my wife. She's always like, you need to let Mark talk more.
Well, no, I appreciate what you share as well, by all means.
Yeah.
So that being said, by all means, know that we care about you as our listener, and we share these things in a desire to offer you hope and encouragement in the midst of difficult circumstances, and the ability to have that hope to know that the dark nights are not indefinite.
That's
that
right.
They are indeed, can be followed by bright days.
Bright days.
Where we're able to recognize, that God is faithful in that process. So that being said, if you're in the midst of a dark night, by all means, reach out, find support. Don't be afraid to contact us. And, if you're in the midst of a bright day, by all means, enjoy it and be grateful and give God thanks for that. So that being said, I thank you, Justin.
Yeah. For real though, if you do want to reach out to us, you can reach us at howiseeit.click.
Sure.
Or info.
Well done.
That's how we see it.
That's how we see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.